Hello, and welcome back to Pathfinder. My name is Philip, and I'm here to talk about Pathfinder 2nd Edition. This is part of a series I am producing, covering the various deities in the Pathfinder role-playing game and its setting, the world of Golarion. Last time, I covered one of the most fearsome tyrants in all of Golarion, Abigail II of House Thrune, Queen of Cheliax. This week, I'm covering one of the deities most opposed to Abigail's tyrannical rule, Milani, goddess of hope, devotion, and uprisings, and a former saint of the Church of Aroden. Before that, though, if you enjoy this video and want to hear more Pathfinder lore, consider subscribing or commenting below. With that out of the way, let's move on to the rundown. Milani, commonly called the Everbloom, is a minor goddess with a small following on Golarion, particularly in the Inner Sea region. Like several other deities, she began her existence as a mortal. Her church is organized into small, disconnected cells, and she and her followers deliberately keep a low profile. Her areas of concern are hope, devotion, uprisings, and community. Outside of her dedicated clergy, she is primarily worshipped by the oppressed, the downtrodden, and by freedom fighters. Like many of the former mortals who ascended to divinity, Milani appears much as she did in life, as a bronze-skinned Ayuvaran woman of human ancestry with striking silver-white hair. She wields a morning star in one hand, often raised in defiance, and often wields a shield in the other. The shield is typically marked with her holy symbol. Many depictions show large white swan wings emerging from her back. She is commonly depicted wearing a breastplate of wooden construction, though other depictions show her in more intricate green or brown armor. Her status as an Ayuvaran is an important part of her lore, so she rarely presents herself as any other ancestry or heritage, though I wouldn't be surprised if she were depicted as being of Ekuje or Moangish descent by her followers in Vidrian. That would actually be some very cool art. Get on that, Paizo. As a goofy little side note, most depictions consistently depict her showing a surprising amount of skin, including unarmored thighs and the infamous boob window. I have no idea why that is, especially considering the relative chastity of her story and areas of focus. Unlike many deities, Milani actually maintains two homes in the Great Beyond. Her primary realm is Milani's Garden, a realm of roses in Elysium, which is notably separate from the realms of the elven deities. Her second realm, the Refuge of the Red Rose, is located in Axis of all places. Tucked away near the center of the still crumbling divine realm of Aroden, Milani uses this realm as a staging ground for her more active operations, from attempting to fight the institutionalized inequality of Axis to serving as a way station for those souls and beings seeking freedom from their oppressive former homes. Also, not to go on a huge digression, but I'm realizing now that I neglected to mention Aroden's deific realm in my video on the Last Aslanti. My bad. In short, despite treating Absalom as his home and pet project, Aroden did in fact maintain a divine realm in Axis. It was outside of the city walls of Axis itself, but still existed on the same plane. Aroden created it as an idealized utopian city, encouraging his followers to attempt to replicate it in their own settlements. Since his death, the realm has been given the name of the Empty Court, and it is slowly collapsing back into raw quintessence, the soul stuff which makes up the outer planes. The realm is still occupied, to a small degree, and Milani and her followers have been forced to fend off the forces of the Iranese devil Methricandra, who hopes to dominate the realm for herself and thus ascend to divinity. Devout followers of Milani, called Milanites, are first and foremost devoted to their community. While they have a reputation as rebels and revolutionaries, they only take up arms when necessary. In places of peace and equity, they are content to contribute to the health and wellness of their communities in non-violent and very conventional ways. They might run charities, act as healers, coordinate civic projects, manage the town watch, or simply settle on a common trade, such as farming or carpentry. At the first sign of trouble, however, Milanites will show their true colors. They are the first to stand up against bullies or tyrants, and are unafraid to respond to threats of violence with violence of their own. They are experts in training civilians in the art of war and resistance, and are unafraid to take up leadership positions when necessary, though never in a quest for personal glory. Martyrdom is an idea commonly embraced by her followers, who recognize that they often face overwhelming odds in their struggles for liberty. Priests are taught early on that they are likely to die for their beliefs, but that the sacrifice is never made in vain. Many followers of Milani believe in reincarnation, convinced that Milani will send their souls back to take up the fight again. Some followers even believe that they are the third or fourth reincarnation of a devout Milanite, and believe that they draw upon the lessons of their past lives when they plan their insurgent activities. Milanites place special emphasis on preparedness and pragmatism. During times of peace, they are known to stockpile weapons, armor, and resources in preparation for future conflicts. They are well read on their histories, especially the history of civic defense, tyranny, and revolution. They might also maintain a good working knowledge of local politics, regional conflicts, and historical threats to their native region, in order to be better prepared to face enemy threats likely to challenge their community. They are unafraid to ask for help in times of need, from experienced mercenaries and fighters to subject matter experts on whatever challenge they face. They seek no glory for themselves, even if it means elevating others to leadership positions within a movement. The Church of Milani is organized much like a cult, operating largely in secret sects which are mostly disconnected from one another. This might seem odd for a good-aligned goddess in good standing with her fellow benevolent deities, but makes sense when you consider that her faith is most active in regions governed by tyrants or the forces of evil. As such, many temples or places of worship are improvised to some degree, and often serve as bases of operations for insurgent and rebel movements, containing barracks, arms storage, and rooms for strategizing. Purpose-built temples to Milani are structured much like a classical Roman or Greek-style theater, with a series of benches descending toward a central stage, where leaders can speak in full view of the attendees. These buildings are often decorated with, or even surrounded by, rose bushes. Under the benches, many temples contain a secret storage area intended for weapons, equipment, or even for use as shelters for wanted rebels. Shrines to Milani are typically quite simple, consisting of a rose garden or single rose bush surrounded by small flat stones. These shrines are commonly found in abandoned Arodenite temples, or in or around temples to Iomide. Since roses are relatively common and even associated with other less violent religions, these shrines might be easily disguised, even in areas of relative tyranny and oppression. Due to the close relationship between the two churches, shrines to Milani might also be found in and around temples of Cadencalion. Milani's holy text is the Light of Hope, a text which begins as a recounting of the Everbloom's personal history, then transitions into lessons for followers. These lessons might be moral or ethical in nature, but also include more practical teachings on the art of insurgency and rebellion. Some congregations separate this text into 2 volumes, one on Milani's life and the other on her direct instructional teachings. As mentioned earlier, Milani's church is small and disorganized. The Everbloom is a minor goddess and seeks to keep attention away from herself and her followers. Given that the church is most active in areas where it is actively hunted, this makes sense. In the Inner Sea region, the Church of Milani has active ongoing efforts in Nidal and Infernal Cheliax, as well as the broader Chelish Empire, including Ravenel and Isger. The church was also involved in the Sargavan Revolution and has a strong presence in the new nation of Vidrian as a result. Presumably, the church maintains good standing within nations or regions opposed to Cheliax, such as Andoran or Bag Island within the Shackles, in areas which have thrown off tyrants of their own, like Corvosa, and with organizations like the Firebrands, the Bellflower Network, and the Eagle Knights. The church is also strongly opposed to slavery, and so might also have had operations in Katapesh and Kadira until recently. Milani was born a half-elf among a community of forlorn elves near Kyonin. For context, forlorn elves are elves raised in close proximity to other shorter-lived ancestries, typically humans. They grow up witnessing the deaths of their non-elven friends, and tend to develop morose and withdrawn attitudes as a result. As a child, Milani was raised to believe that the true might of the elves would one day return to Golarion from far-off Castrovel, leading to a new elvish golden age. These beliefs were shattered when, in 2497 AR, the nascent demon lord Treerazer settled in the forests of Kyonin and began his plans to turn the Ayudara, the Elf Gates, into a permanent portal to the Outer Rifts. The forlorn elves of Milani's community did nothing in response, convinced that the elves of Castrovel would surely return within a century or two to face the Lord of the Tanglebriar. Milani, realizing that a century of patience was something only full-blooded elves could afford, abandoned the teachings of her youth, embracing the fiery nature of her human heritage. She began a resistance movement against Treerazer and his forces. At this point, Aroden took notice. Impressed by Milani's strength and persistence, Aroden blessed her as a champion of his church, empowering her with authority and giving her access to the resources of his faith. From here on, Milani began to make a name for herself across the Inner Sea more broadly. She became a champion of the people, following Aroden's direction and defending the frontiers of civilization against the ever-present threat of domination. For over a century she fought, never turning her back on those who needed her. But even a half-elf, an Ayuvaran, can't outrun age forever, and she eventually found her limbs growing heavy and her reactions slowing. She accepted that her death was imminent, and sought a final quest to inspire those she would leave behind. It didn't take long for her to find one. In the remote corners of Taldor, a cult of diabolists was hatching a plan to sacrifice 100 virgins in exchange for immortality. Milani set out, taking up her mace one last time. She found the cultists and set to work, fighting ferociously. As she struck the final blow, her heart gave out, and death came for her. Aroden, however, wasn't ready to give up on Milani. He reached out with his divine power, restoring her youth. Her muscles were filled with new strength, and her hair, long ago having faded to gray, was restored to its original shining white. Milani had become a living saint, empowered by a sliver of Aroden's divine power, which now lived inside of her. She would remain a saint for hundreds of years, witnessing the eventual return of the elves to Golarion in 2632 AR. Her sainthood might have been permanent were it not for the events of 4606. After the death of Aroden, Milani's combat experience kicked back in. While many of her fellow saints were struck down by fiends seeking to exploit the last Aslante's absence, Milani resisted. The spark of Aroden's power still burned within her, despite his death, and this, coupled with Milani's unwillingness to abandon the followers of the dying Arodenite church, allowed her to ascend to full divinity. She has been a goddess ever since, making her only a century old, and one of the youngest deities in the Golarion pantheon. She and her followers quickly took action against the rise of the Diabolist Thrune regime in Cheliax, but were unable to prevent their ascension. The Church has since set up a resistance movement in the Empire. The Church of Milani was also active in the revolutions in Andoran and Ravenel. The fall of Sargava involved the Milanite Church as well, in conjunction with the churches of Cadencalion and Lubaiko, among others. The Church was also, unfortunately, involved with the Red Revolution of Galt, though Milani has condemned those efforts ever since they abandoned the goal of freedom and embraced senseless violence. Her thoughts on the events of the Night of Grey Death adventure have not yet been detailed. Since Milani's power comes from a mere sliver of Aroden's deific might, she is considerably less powerful than the ancient gods from the Age of Creation, like Asmodeus and Zon-Kuthon. This is an issue, since these two deities are her most hated enemies. She is also weaker than the Starstone Ascendant deities, like her sister goddess Iomide or her friend Cadencalion. She compensates for her relative weakness with clever tactics and a willingness to go unnoticed by her enemies. Milani's fierce opposition to tyranny has made her a fierce friend of Cayden Cailean, and their churches commonly work together in areas of oppression. Canaanite churches are more easily accepted or hidden, even in places ruled by evil regimes, and these temples have been known to harbor followers of Milani in secret. Notably, this is one relationship which Cayden Cailean has never attempted to elevate to being romantic in nature, and he considers Milani to be among his closest friends. Milani even provided a weapon of her own creation to Thace, the herald of Cayden Cailean. As a fellow former follower of Aroden, Iyomide recognizes Milani as something of a sister figure. The two goddesses both served as militant followers of Aroden during the Age of Enthronement, and each ascended to divinity due to their desire to serve their followers better. Despite their differences, with Milani's greater emphasis on resistance and disobedience, the two goddesses remain friendly, and might soon work together as Iyomide begins to take efforts to overthrow the diabolic regime of Cheliax. Despite her tendency to inspire rebellions, Milani is on good terms with the generally orderly gods Erastil and Torag. Each of these deities is devoted to their particular communities. Small towns for Erastil and dwarven settlements and cities for Torag. Despite their typical reverence for law and societal structure, each of these stern fatherly figures recognizes that oppressive regimes can only be overturned by disobedience and revolution. Desna deeply appreciates Milani for her devotion to hope. Similarly, Milani sees Shelyn as the perfect example of devotion. Both of their churches might support followers of the Everbloom, especially the Church of Desna in Nidal. The Church of Shelyn, meanwhile, is openly allowed in Cheliax, and likely serves as a subtle ally against the Asmodean regime. Oddly, Milani's friendliness does not extend to Sarenrae, the third member of the Prismatic Ray pantheon. The Everbloom treats the Dawnflower with cold respect, recognizing that she is a force for good and a strong opponent of Asmodeus and the tyrannical forces of Hell. That said, she takes issue with Sarenrae's open patronage of the Kelishite Empire, a nation which, until very recently, openly allowed and profited off the slave trade. The recent abolition of slavery in Kalesh has not yet warmed Milani's opinion of Sarenrae. Of course, Milani is opposed to all tyrannical and oppressive deities, chief among them being Asmodeus and his hellish followers. She also opposes Zon Kuthon, though his relative seclusion compared to Asmodeus means he has few efforts for her to oppose. Milani would be crushed by these older and more powerful deities, except that she has become adept at leveraging her position as a minor goddess to keep attention off of herself. For example, Asmodeus focuses so much attention on Cayden Cailean, who openly opposes his efforts in Cheliax, that Milani, who supports those same opposition campaigns, goes by relatively unnoticed. Having been raised as an Ayuvaran, Milani is, by her nature, connected to the elves and their gods. That said, her abandonment of her elvish heritage also signified an abandonment of the gods of her childhood. She generally ignores the elvish pantheon, unwilling to acknowledge the elves who refused to act quickly against the threats to Golarion, and unwilling to acknowledge the gods who allowed this behavior. The one exception to this rule is, as mentioned, Desna, who is commonly worshipped by elves, but who encourages active resistance against evil on the part of her followers. Milani also has loose affiliations with other deities through her involvement in various niche pantheons on Golarion. For instance, the Freeing Flame, the pantheon consisting of Milani, Lubaiko, and Cayden Cailean, is widely worshipped in Vidrian. These three deities are widely considered to have ignited the revolt which led to the wider Sargavan uprising. The Last Breath, the pantheon consisting of Milani, Calistria, and Erasni, declares that followers should never give up, even in the face of overwhelming odds. They preach the importance of striking at your enemies even with your final breath, either to inspire those around you or to inflict one last act of vengeance. This pantheon is commonly worshipped by members of the Firebrands. On Golarion, Milani's church also has good relationships with the Eagle Knights of Andoran, the Bellflower Network, the Silver Ravens of Ravenel, and some of the Free Captains of the Shackles. For players interested in playing characters who follow Milani, here are some useful details. For those using the alignment rules, Milani is chaotic good and will accept clerics of chaotic neutral and neutral good alignment. Her edicts are to confront oppression in all its forms, to defend the common folk, and to overcome despair to seize victory. Conversely, to abandon those in need, to enslave or oppress others, or to harm the innocent through direct or inadvertent action are all anathema to Milani. Her holy symbol is a blooming rose growing from a blood-soaked cobblestone street. Roses, more generally, can serve as informal signals of allegiance to the Everbloom. Her domains are change, destruction, freedom, and zeal. Milani's sacred colors are red and white, though green might be incorporated into the faith as well, as a representation of a rose's stem. Followers engaging in religious ceremonies will often wear a simple white and brown tabard, decorated with an embroidered rose and pinned with various trinkets, ranging from buttons to ribbons. These trinkets are meant to symbolize the followers' friends and acquaintances who lost their lives in the fight against tyranny. Due to her emphasis on opposition to tyranny, followers of Milani must often hide their faith and dress in plain clothes in areas where they are most politically active. Many followers are simple common folk, and therefore might only ever dress in working clothes, even once a revolution is fully kicked off. More militant followers, often the leaders in the movement, might dress in more recognizable clothing once the conflict breaks out. Among these followers, breastplates and shields embossed with large, brightly painted holy symbols of Milani are common. Heavy armor is uncommon among followers due to its substantial cost, and the difficulty of storing it for fear of discovery. Additionally, Milanites are known to favor hit-and-run tactics, emphasizing a need for speed and flexibility in their equipment. The Everbloom's sacred weapon is the Morning Star, an easily wielded weapon which allows wielders to either deal bludgeoning or piercing damage. In addition to the Morning Star, other simple weapons might easily be found among followers: clubs, maces, daggers, spears, and hand or heavy crossbows. Particularly common might be weapons which serve functional purposes outside of combat: the staff, the shears, the sling, and the ever-impressive frying pan. Followers might also employ weapons they take off their oppressors during a revolt. Milani's favored animal is the mouse, a common, easily overlooked beast. She also has a fondness for all white animals, which she often sends to followers as a sign of her favor. These bright white animals might include snowy owls, horses, dogs, or swans, among others. While I have found no mention of animals which display albinism, these might be an appropriate choice as well. Milani is also believed to have had a loyal hound as an animal companion in her mortal life. Milani's formal clergy consists almost entirely of rangers and clerics, due in no small part to Milani's own status as a ranger in her mortal life. War priest clerics and flurry or precision rangers will serve well to lead uprisings from the front lines, while cloistered clerics will do a better job of providing magical support, and outwit rangers will likely serve effectively as information gatherers for a potential revolution. Other classes which can potentially operate from a place of anonymity, such as the rogue or investigator, might perform well in areas of oppression. At the same time, charismatic leaders like swashbucklers, bards, sorcerers, or oracles might be able to effectively drum up support for rebellious movements. Archetypes which might be found among the faithful include the marshal, to inspire and rally rebels in the streets, or the dandy, vigilante, alter ego, or captivator to infiltrate the halls of power and gather information. Characters with a focus on helping their community outside of combat might take feats from the medic or herbalist archetypes. Milani's church is small, and she deliberately tries to keep a low profile. As such, her faith is slow to spread, and her clerics are careful about evangelizing. Humans are her most common followers by far, in no small part because she is most active in Cheliax and Nidal, both regions with a high proportion of human citizens. Due to her own origins as a half-elf, Milani's faith attracts a large number of half-humans, particularly Ayuvaren and Dromar. I will be very excited to see if additional half-humans or other mixed ancestry characters are drawn to Milani's faith, now that the remaster has provided mechanics for new mixed ancestry combinations. One thing which surprised me in researching this video is that halflings are not especially drawn to her faith, at least not substantially more so than dwarves or gnomes. I would have expected the halflings of Cheliax or the members of the Bellflower Network to be drawn to the Everbloom's faith. This may simply be due to Milani's faith being relatively small, leading to the halflings of Cheliax, and Avestan more broadly, choosing instead to follow Cadencalion or Norgorber, or the halfling deities Chaldira and Thamir Gix. As a cool but wacky idea, a Goron who comes to follow Milani might serve as something of a visual pun. Goron's faces take on the appearance of blooming flowers, so a Goron with red petals who stands tall among his defeated enemies might take on the visual of Milani's holy symbol, a rose standing on blood-covered ground. Devout followers of Milani are individuals with a connection to their communities and those who live in them. They are eternally hopeful, even in the face of overwhelming odds, and are willing to fight to the last man in the name of a worthy cause. They believe in standing up against evil and resisting oppression, though they are not so foolish that they thoughtlessly engage in naked opposition. Many of them learn the importance of biding their time and waiting for the right moment to strike, and must balance this with their devotion to and compassion for their fellow citizens. For further character inspiration, or to homebrew some custom magic items for a follower of Milani, check out her first edition page on Archives of Nethys. Her deific obedience is full of flavor, and is a great example of the devotion a follower should demonstrate to his or her community. The Peasant Armaments spell is very cool for the way it hands out weapon proficiency, and the Martyr's Last Blessing spell is also very cool. The Milanite armor is awesome for a follower who needs to remain hidden in the field, and the Rose Warden Prestige class is a good source of build inspiration. For GMs looking to incorporate Milani and her followers into a campaign, here are some ideas. Milani's current herald is Courage Heart, a half-elf who was once a mortal. Courage Heart was a revolutionary in Galt's Red Revolution. She participated enthusiastically until the revolution turned from a fight for freedom to a fight for revenge. She was captured by the Grey Gardeners and put to death in one of the nation's final blades, the infamous soul-trapping guillotines. Milani freed Courage Heart's soul from the machine, then raised her to the status of herald. Courage Heart was appointed to the position of herald fairly recently, within the last 60 years, and therefore refuses to go by her real name, for fear of actions which might be taken against her still living family members. Courage Heart takes the form of a half-elven woman, wearing wooden armor and wielding a wooden mace. A thorny rose in her left hand causes blood to drip down her arm constantly. Milani is also closely associated with Thace, the herald of Cadencalion, having crafted Thace's own halberd as a gift. Milani's divine servitors are unknown, though the Elysium-born human rangers Charl and Dalam the Lucky are also known to serve her, as is the Hound Archon Nyla, who was once her own animal companion before being raised to near divinity. Milani shows favor to her followers by making roses bloom nearby, or by the appearance of white animals like mice, hares, or birds. Her disfavor, by contrast, is shown by the wilting of nearby flowers, by the emergence of thorns on nearby plants, or by small wounds bleeding excessively. Additionally, those who have angered her might witness pooling liquids flowing into the vague shape of a blooming rose. Milani and her church are best suited to revolution-themed campaigns. Nations like Cheliax or Nidal are great fits for a campaign like this, but other nations like Mizali, certain river kingdoms, or Razmiran might be a good fit for this type of story as well. Galt might be a great setting for a campaign which explores a different aspect of revolutionary stories, a revolution which lost its way and descended into chaotic, needless violence. Here, a follower of Milani will need to contend with the after-effects of a poorly managed revolution, and the danger which it posed to the innocent civilian population. If this idea appeals to you, be sure to look into the recent Night of Grey Death adventure to understand the most recent information on Galt. As a slightly different idea, a fun adventure might have the Church of Milani involving itself in the civic defense of a small town. Followers of Milani are typically skilled at training, arming, and leading otherwise non-militant civilians. I'm imagining an adventure where a party of Milanites and their allies learns of a threat, maybe giants or ogres, approaching a nearby small frontier town. They can return to the town, then try to coordinate with the local churches, possibly of Erastil or Cadencalion, or maybe Torag. The party of PCs might take on the roles of combat instructors, civil defense engineers, or battlefield leaders. They might take on quests to travel to a nearby lord to petition for aid, to scout or set traps against the oncoming invaders, to raid on nearby dungeons for weapons and artifacts of power, or even to rescue captives the invaders have already taken. Finally, followers of Milani might take up arms against the threat which initially inspired her adventuring career, Treerazer. The nascent demon lord makes his home in his realm of Tanglebriar, near the forest of Kyonin. The elves of Kyonin have, since their return, taken a more aggressive stance against him, and have even begun working with the dwarves of Highhelm to train and equip troops of warriors. Milani, seeing this development, might send her followers to aid in this training and the eventual battle against the Lord of the Blasted Tarn. An adventure or campaign centered on this might involve scouting missions into the Tanglebriar, targeted assassination missions against his lieutenants, including the demons Makravud and Vamolaroth, and battles against Treerazer's corrupted Fae and Elf followers. So that's it. That's Milani, the Everbloom, goddess of hope, devotion, and benevolent rebellion. While she is a minor goddess in the grand scheme of things, she is active in several major conflicts across the Inner Sea region, and can still have a significant impact on the history of Golarion. Up next is another minor deity of the Inner Sea region, one who is a bit more niche in her interests. Next time, I'll be discussing Ashava, the Imperial Lord of Dancers, Lonely Spirits, and Moonlight. See you next time.